This is the Giraffes Don't Eat Steak podcast, a show that brings you marketing stories, tips, hints, and much more. A treat for those who want to succeed in business or marketers who just want to learn.
Hello, Alex.
Hey Erica, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Very well. So I'm excited to introduce Chris today. So Chris and his business Joe Mule have a animation and video company for B2B brands. I've been following Chris for quite a while and enjoying a lot of his posts because he's got quite a good sense of humor, and he's a self-acclaimed, I think, has a PhD in sarcasm, which is right up my street as well. So the very funny guy to follow on Instagram, on LinkedIn. So welcome, Chris.
Great to be with you. Appreciate the shout out for the PhD. It was a long time coming.
So if you just want to, do you want to just give yourself a quick intro to our guest so we can learn a little bit about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as Alex said, I run a small animation studio. We work with B2B brands, primarily tech, SaaS, finance are our three main kind of areas. There's a lot of crossovers with those, usually very complicated products. So it's a good fit for us. Personally, I've been working in kind of marketing and video production for over 20 years now. So I like to think that I know a little bit about some of it, but never claim to know all of it. And yeah, I enjoy LinkedIn as an experience, and it's been a great channel to grow the business over the years, but it's also a good channel to try and provide a few laughs along the way, because I do think that sometimes the B2B world takes itself a bit too seriously.
Yeah, that's true. I've seen quite, you've done some really funny posts about almost like mocking AI whilst using it to create some very funny images as well. The last one I saw was you replaced your family with AI robots.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's been I'm sure, as I'm sure you've both seen, there's been a lot of hyperbole around kind of, closing down almost all your business and replacing all your members of staff with AI agents and things like that. And a lot of it, I don't think there's a lot of truth behind a lot of that at the moment. It seems unlikely that those are real stories. So yeah, it really yeah, I enjoyed putting that one together. And it is powerful for doing those things. That image didn't take very long to kind of to create, and it actually kind of resembles my kids, even though I didn't actually give them a picture of my children to work with, because my children don't exist on the internet anywhere. There's no pictures of them anywhere. So I just kind of said, oh, I've got a daughter who's this old and a little boy who's this old. And I went, oh, that's kind of what they'd look like as robots.
It's kind of worrying in a
That
way.
is scary.
Yeah. I think it's hopefully equally funny and scary.
So I want to jump in straight away with a question around explainer videos, because this is one that I've always come across with working with businesses, and a lot of them want or think they need explainer videos, or it just seems to be quite a hot topic when for marketing teams, especially in B2B SaaS and tech businesses. What do you see is the kind of number one issue that people have creating the video, or the biggest mistake that people make when creating those videos? Because there are a lot of videos that I think maybe don't hit the mark. So I was just wondering, from your point of view, what would that be?
So, I mean, there's a few things really in terms of, I suppose, when people approach them wrong. I've probably experienced a few of these with people maybe we've not ended up working with, really, because it's just not been a particularly, it's not been a good fit from both of our perspectives. One of them, usually the biggest one, is really they don't really understand, and this is a wider marketing problem really, that just gets really focused in when you're trying to produce something as concise as a 60-second explainer video, is that they don't really understand who their audience is. It's a bit
Yeah.
broad, and it's very hard to produce any kind of really targeted messaging when you don't really understand what that target audience looks like. So that's usually a bit of a red flag when we get a briefing or I do a discovery call with people, or I just see videos out in the wild and just think, I don't know who this is really, who it's talking to. And there's that old adage of, if you try to talk to everybody, you're not talking to anybody because nobody's really listening. So that's one big thing and a big hurdle usually to get over with. Although I'd say in the SaaS world, by the time we speak to them, they've usually, because the product's been developed around it's solving a very specific set of problems for a very specific audience. That hurdle in terms of people's audience and not knowing them tends to be a wider B2B problem for companies who aren't, quite as focused in the product. It's one of those problems where they think the product solves problems for everybody, so everybody's the target audience. So that's a big problem. The other one I think is overcomplicating storytelling and confusing kind of adding too much detail into things and not really understanding that an explainer video, when it's been used as a kind of top of funnel piece of content, shouldn't be trying to do, the entire sales process for you in 60 seconds because it's just not possible. So it tends to end up with a really confused message where people don't really understand because you've not dug into the things that they really care about enough because you're trying to move them along a sales cycle and kind of show them everything a product does and all the benefits and things like that. So yeah, I think that those two things are probably the two biggest hurdles and the things that people get wrong the most is complicating what they're trying to say and not really understanding who their audience really is, because an explaining video should be a foot in the door, really, for a new client. It should just give them enough information that they want to kind of dig into your product or your company more so that your other content then does the job of kind of filling in the gaps for them. It shouldn't be trying to tell them everything that you've done and the history of the company and who all the staff are and all these kind of things that, it's just not the purpose of them. And that's probably the two main things I'd say.
It's interesting. One of the other than those two, which I agree with, one of the problems I've had in the past is, especially with a tech product, is where the owner or the main product developer is more excited about a particular feature than what the client actually wants. Like that's not the client's main need. So they want to focus on, I don't know, something random that no one even knows about because that's what excites them. But actually, it doesn't meet the client need. So that disjoint between, what the owner wants to showcase almost.
Yeah.
And then try to explain, well, that's a showcase, but it's a completely different purpose, right? And explain a video should meet the need of the client. Whereas, if it's a showcase going, look what's exciting about us, that's probably more for competitors rather than for your clients. Have you come across that?
Yeah, and I'd say one of the main times that happens, and it does happen with SaaS companies and tech companies, is when maybe people outside of the marketing department get involved in the briefing process,
Oh, yes.
particularly if the dev team or the CTO has got involved, or if the founder is a technical founder. They tend to be quite excited about the capabilities of what the product does and get a bit drawn into the kind of, but look at all the amazing things that it can do. Or sometimes just this is the newest thing that we've added in terms of features, and it's like it might not even be a core piece of functionality for the product, but it's just the newest thing. So they're very excited, and that's great to get that kind of enthusiasm about a product, but it's not always directed in the right place. I think when you try to kind of cram that stuff in, and like you said, that kind of stuff is great further down the line in different kinds of videos, where you're letting people see beneath the hood of a product and what its actual capabilities are. But yeah, top of the funnel, I just don't think people care enough about those things.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's the most difficult one is the founder, owner, who's technical, who built the product, because they just get super excited about the technicalities of it. It's very hard to make a customer excited about that when it's not really showing any benefit to them. So, what kind of trends are you seeing at the moment in terms of video and animation production, or maybe what are you getting asked to do the most at the moment, or what are the trends?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple of things. One, obviously, there's a lot of excitement around AI video capabilities. Not really crept into animation, particularly at this time. It tends to be focused on, AI generated live footage, of which there's some impressive stuff. I'm still not entirely convinced by it as a product. I think. Case in point, there was, I don't know whether you saw it, there was a fake Tesla Cybertruck ad that was doing the rounds, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, that somebody had produced with AI tools only. It was a full live action commercial for, it was fake, but it was a live action commercial for Tesla and for Cybertrucks. And people were, on the surface, were going crazy about how amazing this ad was. It looked so realistic and blah, blah, blah. And I just thought, when you dug beneath the impressiveness of how realistic it looked, and there were areas where you could tell it, I still think you could tell it was AI. The ad itself was actually terrible. Like, it didn't make any sense. It wouldn't have been something that Tesla would have produced by a long shot. There were huge kind of holes in the story and the plot, I think, of what they were trying to sell. Essentially, it was like a family of 3, child, mum, dad. Mum was out for a run, thinking about things. I think the dad was like a pilot or something in the Air Force, something like this. So it kept cutting to scenes of him and his cockpit and his young son at home, kind of thinking about his dad and things like that. And a number of people pointed out, who's looking after the kid? Like,
That's my first thought.
They've just left the 6-year-old at home whilst the mum went out for a run. And I thought, well, that's it's things like that. I think that when you start digging beneath the hood of some of the AI generated stuff, you think there's a difference between a good ad and an impressive visual, and usually, I think at the moment they're not there. So anyway, that hasn't really crept into animated video because I just don't think you've got the control there. Because it has to be a lot more precise, because it's not reliant on whether something looks realistic or not. Seems to be the only kind of barrier for AI video at the moment. Is, does it look realistic? Has everybody got 5 fingers and on each hand and things like that? Whereas animation, because it is actually a lot simpler than live action footage, I think it's going to be difficult to get the control at the moment. So that's, fortunately, it's not something that's really crept into what we're doing. I mean, I'd say the main thing it's not really a trend in terms of what we're producing. It's more the kinds of products that we're dealing with. AI has crept into everything. So a lot of our SaaS clients, we're now doing new versions of product videos for them because they've added AI capabilities into the product. So there's a lot of that going on, and trying to, again, it's such a complicated thing to try and get across in videos when you're talking about what the AI is actually doing, what is it actually providing, why is it something that customer needs to care about. So that's a challenge, I think, to do that stuff, because it's one of those things that now everybody's talking about it, and every product has got AI as a kind of an add-on. It becomes quite a noisy marketplace.
And then what do you do when, like yesterday, the whole of LinkedIn was talking about the fact that ChatGPT was down?
Yes, exactly.
So if your AI is down, then what?
This
In
is
fact,
it.
I was speaking to a friend of mine, and she was like, "Oh, she's a copywriter," and she said, "Oh, I'll have to do this later. ChatGPT's down now." And I'm like, "You can't write copy anymore."
It's forgotten now in the last year. I'm sure it was a problem for a lot of people, to be fair. Yeah, I mean, you can tell the people, I think, yesterday on LinkedIn, who used ChatGPT a lot, because they were the ones saying, "Oh, ChatGPT's down. What's everybody going to do?" Thinking, I don't think you've got anything else to say. That's the
Exactly.
It was the best day to go onto LinkedIn and read some authentic posts.
Yeah.
And kind of go back in time, sort of. I don't know how long ago was it, like 3 years ago maybe, when when we didn't really have so much capabilities, when we had a lot more authenticity in LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I didn't even notice till I was talking to my friend at like 3 o'clock. So I just carried on as normal. And then suddenly when I was talking to my friend, we're like, oh no, I couldn't do any work today. ChatGPT was down. Like, what?
That's hilarious. Also very worrying.
It is a bit worrying.
Maybe don't name your friend
I'm
online.
not naming. I'm not naming.
So, Chris, you mentioned so the business is adding in AI as like a feature and having to now explain that in their new product videos. Do you find, because Eric and I, we used to work in TV kind of, we did TV adverts, and we used to do different length TV adverts depending on, if it was a new market or if it was a slightly new product, and if we needed to extend it or make it shorter, or how long it's been in the market, for et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we had different lengths for kind of different objectives, really. Is there a sort of sweet spot in terms of video length for a SaaS company who are just wanting to create awareness around a new product they have, for example?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, there is, but there's a lot of factors. So that a lot of agencies, and it's just because it's easier to communicate this, will say, "I'll make sure your explaining videos no longer than 60 seconds," or it's got to be 45 seconds and things like that, because there is some research knocking around, but the research is old that says, "Oh, basically people's attention span when they're watching a piece of video, the closer you get to 2 minutes, the less engaged they are. They're not paying attention after the 2 minute mark. They're just not watching it at all." But the research, people still use that and quote that quite a lot, and but the research is at least 10 years old now, and things have changed quite a lot in the kind of just the general video landscape. What is true is, I think, that people will watch something if they're interested in it, because people will sit through a 3 hour Joe Rogan podcast, for instance, if the guest is somebody that they're interested in.
People watch a TV series back to back 10 hours
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've just watched the second season of Andor. I don't know whether you're a fan of this. It's a Star Wars kind of series that's on Disney currently. It's very good. But the second series got released, and I purposely didn't watch it when they were releasing it week by week, because I thought I'm probably going to try and watch a chunk of these. So I'll sit through 3 hours worth of that if I can. If once the kids have gone to bed anyway. So it's a bit of a myth, the kind of duration thing. What is true is that if people are coming to your product very cold and they're right at the top of that funnel, they're probably not going to sit through a 5 minute kind of demo video, because they don't know what the product is, they don't know why they're watching it, and all those kind of things. So I like to look at it that the further down the kind of sales marketing funnel, I don't like the word funnel, but the further down they are in that kind of awareness stage, the longer you can commit, they'll commit to watching something, because they've already got, if they've watched the explainer video and they're now digging into maybe some videos that are more demo related or product kind of under the hood, they've already got the buy-in that they think this is something that they probably want to know more about. It may be solving a problem for them. So yeah, I always say, that top of the funnel thing should be as long as it needs to be and as short as it can be. Don't overdo it. Don't talk about things that they don't care about at this stage. So I mean, it still is, 60 to 90 seconds is long enough to say some good messaging across, but it's not, people shouldn't be watching it thinking, or turning off halfway through before you've delivered the message, really. So yeah, that's
Exactly.
still the sweet spot, really. But like I said, that then does change when they're coming to, and there's also some factors of kind of, how have they arrived at that video? Have you sent them there via, paid traffic? Of the there's lots of factors. So it's actually quite difficult, I think, which is why I find it quite funny when people are quite adamant that it has to be X amount. There is a definitive length of video, because I think what it's interesting actually. So I used to work. I used to edit videos and put commercials together for essentially football clubs' kind of internal channels that they used to run at the grounds in a previous job, and there we essentially had like videos could be as long as you wanted them to be because you had a captive audience who were there because they supported that football club, so they quite happily watched 10 minutes of one guy scoring goals all season.
Exactly.
But if you tried to show that to like just a general Premier League audience, they're not going to watch, an hour's worth of Alan Shearer videos, whereas a Newcastle fan would be quite happy to sit through an hour's worth of Alan Shearer. So I do think, your audience comes into it, and it's like you said, when when you were doing those TV ads, there were definitive markers, I suppose, in terms of where it was going, who was going to be seeing it, and things like that. So I think that still applies. It's just been shifted a little bit.
And it's linked to my understanding of when people don't know you, so the higher up the funnel, with these funnel for now, they're willing to give you very little time and attention, right? So it's about understanding that journey. The more they know you, the more they're interested in what you've got, the more they actually have a need for the product, the more time and attention and effort. And remember, even just watching is effort, right? This is my time, which is precious to me. Is your 10 minutes in my mind translating into value, right? That I could be watching something else worth. So it's about understanding where that customer is in relation to you, and therefore where their time, energy, effort, and that's why people that ask for money up front, I find ludicrous, because they're not even willing to give you time or effort. Why would they give you money, right? You have to go further down when they're willing to actually give you time, give you energy, then they'll give you money. But if they're at the top and they're not even willing to watch a 30-second video, why on earth would they give you money? So the sale is too quick. You too quick on the mark. You got to wait a bit. And I think that flows with the videos. We actually tested. We did 15-second slots. We did 30 seconds. We tested quite a lot. And it was very much around if they'd heard of, if again, it's an old adage, but it's still true, because someone needs to see and interact with you X number of times, whether it's 7 or 11 or 15, depends on which guru you're listening to. But it's not one, right? It's not one. So someone who has at least seen you 7 or 8 times is going to be happy with a 15-second as a reminder, going, oh yeah, I meant to call that number, versus someone who's never heard about you, never seen your product, doesn't know anything about it. A 15-second is going to die. Like, they don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
So,
True.
although you say old stats, the principle on which those stats were built is still right. I think people have just pulled the stats out and removed the interpretation now, right? It's just floating as numbers, but it's the number with the interpretation that's still impactful.
Yeah. I think that's my issue with those stats actually was that, I mean, times have changed a little bit, in whenever that data was pulled together, but it's only really relevant with the context of how it was done. You can't just I think when I actually looked at it properly, there was no definitive answer because there's too many variables in terms of where their audience is and how aware they are of your products and all those kind of things. So it's just it's difficult to just kind of. But what I will say though on that is that I suppose you're not going to do it by producing quite a short video that really just hits home the 2 or 3 main things that what do you want people to come away from a video and remember about your product. Pick 1 or 2 things, don't pick 5 or 6 things.
What do you want them to do, think, and feel, right?
Exactly, yeah. I don't think you're going to do, if people arrive, let's say you're hosting an explaining video on a landing page or in your homepage, and it's not short, concise, it's 45 seconds, it goes, this is, is this you? Are you having this problem? We've got a solution. It does this. Your life will look like this after it. Here's what to do next. If people have got no idea what the product is and who you are, that's great for them. It's perfect. you're not going to do yourself any harm if somebody who maybe has some awareness of, it's just going to reinforce their kind of belief that you're solving a problem for them. So that's why it is always better to do those kind of top of funnel things as short as you possibly can without diluting. It's a conversation we've actually had this week with a company who I can't exactly articulate what they do, which is probably why we're doing some explainer videos for them. But it's very data heavy what they're doing, and they were quite insistent early on that they wanted it to be sub 60 seconds the video, and I was like, okay, well, we've not even started looking at a script yet, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. But I don't know. I think they'd read some stats somewhere that said it needs to be.
Well,
So
they
we
watched the Simon Sinek video. That's my favorite.
probably. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Always start with why. Exactly. So we worked on a script for them, and kept it to the, sub 60 seconds is less than 140 words, which is not a lot of copy for a narrative, read out loud as a voiceover. And of course, as soon as they saw it, they said, this isn't really, we're missing quite a lot of what makes us unique. And I was like, oh, there you go then. It's like you can't get tied to a number because people can't watch it and go, I don't really know what stripping things out to hit an arbitrary, in many cases, number just seems a very odd way of producing content.
It's also quite a good exercise, though, putting a script together to try and explain your product. And if you realize that script then takes you 3 minutes to explain your product, you've got a different problem at that point. You should really now be starting to think, okay, the old elevator pitch. Really, you need to be working on that. If you've got just 20 seconds of someone's time in an elevator, can you explain your product? No. Well, then you need to start really thinking about that in a lot more detail.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And actually, we found that over the years, going through a briefing process and a script writing process with clients who've never done that before is actually a really good exercise from their perspective. It's been fed back a few times that they found it hard to try and get, what they do and why people should care about the product in, 130 to 200 words. It's not a lot. But it really makes them think about what is actually important. What do we want people to remember after they've watched this, and what are the things that the customers, what are the differences that we're really making to customers, rather than, as we alluded to earlier, what's the fancy new thing that the CTO cares about, or that we're the proudest of this feature, but is it necessary for us to talk about all these things? So yeah, it's probably a useful exercise for most companies to go through. Like you said, if you can't do that elevator pitch, you've got a bit of a messaging problem, really. You're overcomplicating things, because there's probably not many great products that can't be explained in 20 seconds in an elevator pitch.
And it does. I think there's also another step before that, which is saying the purpose. We're talking here as if the purpose is to sell product, right? So that's everything we've been saying is that. But sometimes it's just a brand video, and that's okay. But be clear that that's what you're doing. I was working with a client last year where the script that we did, they said there's too much focusing too much on the customer pain point, and not enough on who we are. So I'm saying, okay, so you want a brand video, because that's, if your whole 60 seconds or whatever the video is talking about who you are, that's a brand video. That's not an explainer video. That's not a product, but which is fine. But then acknowledge that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's not going to drive revenue because that's not what brand videos do. So I think sometimes people just get that purpose wrong, and you just by, I don't know if you find this, but by just questioning, what is it you want it to do? Yeah. I find that often clarifies, or people can go, oh no, actually I don't want a brand video. I want it to generate leads. Okay, then you've got to take you out because no one cares about you. That's not how it works. The question is, what's in it for me? So you should be talking to the pain point. That's how you talk, right?
Yeah, yeah, very much so. And it's a really good point that actually, because you really always before you start doing any kind of real in-depth briefing and script writing and things like that is, let's look at what are the desired outcomes for this piece of content. And otherwise you end up going, you try to cram two kinds of video into one
Yeah,
video, which
exactly.
just doesn't work. That's the worst thing in the world. And I don't know, sometimes people need to be, I don't know, it's a hard conversation, but some companies, a brand video isn't worth the money for them. It's not a brand that people are really going to kind of. Everybody always looks at the huge kind of Apple and the kind of brand
Yeah,
work. It's like,
Coca-Cola, and you're like,
you've
yeah,
got,
do you have tons of money? Then
you've got
go that route.
and 30 years to build up brand
Yeah,
equity. This is the reason Apple can produce the videos that they produce, is because they've got 30 years of brand equity
yeah.
behind them. You as a startup or a small business, you just haven't got that. And actually, people just don't think people care enough about most companies. They do care about, what they're doing for how they're helping them. So,
Yeah.
brand isn't always the right move. A lot of it, budget
But
comes
but
budget comes in.
sometimes that's what the client wants, right?
Yep.
They want
Yeah.
a fancy video which says how great they are and how nice they are to work with and what their company values are. And okay, fine, but
Mhm.
don't put a revenue target on that because it's not going to
No,
happen.
no,
That's
because I feel
park
like a lot of those
that, right?
times, yeah, exactly. I feel like there is certainly a place for those kind of videos, but I feel the biggest place for them is probably internally, like
Internal
for
Yeah,
for
exactly.
or shareholders, perhaps,
yeah,
or
is it onboarding new staff and things like that?
yeah.
This is what the company's about. This is the kind of, and that's
Or on the
fine. If there's a
About
good,
Us page of
yeah,
your website, right? That's why it's not the first page of your website. It's the About Us page. It's later.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Oh, this is well, I mean, this is my a bit of a pet peeve of mine, but I do always think if I land on your homepage and there's a nice video to play, and the first sentence starts with the word "we," I think this doesn't belong here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's and it happens a lot, but yeah, yeah, I do. And we've produced a few kind of internally kind of onboarding videos that are very kind of, this is what we're about. These are the company values, like you said. This is the history of the company, and they are nice videos to produce, and they look nice. But the only people who care about them are the people who, within the company, who help produce them. And like you said, shareholders are a good idea. Some of the finance clients that we've produced videos that have been quite, talking about the company history, which isn't something I'd ever recommend doing in any kind of video that was trying to generate revenue. But it's important when people are looking, for investors and shareholders to get on
Yeah.
board. They want to feel that they're part of, there's something bigger behind the kind of logo and things like that. So yeah, like you said,
Or
purpose
awards is a
is
new
everything.
one I'm looking at,
Oh,
right? For awards, you may want to submit a history of the company video.
yep, yep. Although I think most of them would prefer you just to buy a table at the awards ceremony.
Yeah, no, exactly.
That seems to be the main criteria for winning
No,
a lot of
exactly.
awards.
Don't worry about spending money on making the video. Just give us the money, and
Yeah,
happily you'll be more than welcome.
You'll win. You'll be the winner.
yeah. I don't. Have you guys ever been approached by any of the kind of industry kind of awards to say, oh, you've been I've had a couple of like, oh, you've been nominated. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
by who? And then it's, oh no, you want £2,000 to for me to
Yeah.
come and take a table at the dinner. It's like, I'm not sure.
It's a very popular marketing tactic, to provide the value to someone by giving them an award and then getting to know them and then selling your product to them later on as well.
Yeah, yeah. It
Yeah.
seems, well, each their own. And I won't name them, but I know somebody who went through uh, their award kind of nomination process, and I remember, I think I saw him announce on LinkedIn. Of just somebody I've known for a long time, that they've been nominated for an award. I thought it's great, and kind of I happened to be meeting him in a couple of weeks anyway for a coffee, and I said, "Oh, that's great," and he's like, "Yeah, yeah, it's been quite intense. Like they go out and send a panel round to interview you at your business address and stuff like that, and they'll narrow it down. I was like, all right. I said, it seems quite legit then. He said, yeah. He said, we've got to buy a table though, really. That's the thing. It's like, it's £2,000 for us to take a table, £2,500 or something to take a table at the awards night. I said, all right. I said, is that compulsory? He said, they don't say that explicitly, but he said, I got the impression that we possibly wouldn't be in the finalists if we weren't there. I was like, oh, right. And they're just, I don't know, there's a lot of those out there, isn't there? Those kind of like, industry awards, but yeah.
It
So
feels like we need to get an awards guest, Alex. I think I'm going to go shopping around for because it's not the first time this has come up, right? These award scams. I think we need a guest who talks about these awards. I'm going to go find one.
Yeah, exactly. Let's find one who has like a, you know,
a legitimate award.
Legitimate. Yeah, I didn't want to say that. I don't know. I felt like
a not pay to play award. How's that?
Yeah, exactly. That would be quite a good one. So, Chris, if you had to describe like your perfect brief, what would that be? Because I mean, to help any of our listeners who might want to come and make a video, to give them an idea of what they should prepare before they come to speak to someone like you and create a video. What would that look like?
So I mean, so we actually developed a questionnaire essentially to solve this because a lot of the time, especially if you're dealing with startups, this is the first video they've produced, so it's not a process they're familiar with. So to try and make it as straightforward a process, and I'm also usually very wary that they're usually wearing a lot of hats when they're in, especially in startup companies. They're usually juggling a lot of plates, so the last thing they need is constant kind of catch-up calls with an outside agency. So we put a questionnaire together that I'd say realistically, if that was the only piece of information we had, we could probably put a decent script together and a concept together, basically. And it really covers the basics, but the things people should be thinking about is, what are the, like we talked about, who's the target audience, as detailed as possible, who the target kind of demographics are. What does their world look like in terms of before we get to kind of what problems and pain points and things like that, is like, what world do they exist in? I think is always a nice question, just because it gives us an understanding that, it's a finance world, it's a corporate finance world, it's a world of, it's healthcare and things like this. Who the audience is, drill down as much as possible. What are the kind of major headaches that they're facing day to day? How your product, your solution is solving those, and again in quite specific ways. So a lot of people talk about or don't talk about features in a video, just talk about benefits, and I don't like that approach completely, because I think that sometimes you do need to talk about a feature of a product, but it needs to be specifically related to why people need to care about it. What problem is that feature solving, rather than just it does this, it does this, it does this. So yeah, I really like to get into, beyond the top level. Oh, it saves people money, or it's a resource saver, or it saves people time, because those are all universal things that everybody wants to kind of get on board with. There's no product out there that people aren't going to be interested in. If you say it can save you money, save you time, save you resources, but I'd like to know how how it saves people time specifically, like what are the bits, and how is it saving people money, in what ways. I'd like to see examples. Is always good if you've got specific examples, because I think that is a great way to tie the theory of what you're talking about in terms of product with, actually, we've got some clients here who've said it helped us achieve A, B, and C. It grew revenue by, X, Y, and Z, and things like that. I think that's always great.
So you mean like case studies would be useful?
Yeah, your case studies are really useful, because it's kind of, you're seeing the product out in the real world, out in the wild there, so you can really link that. And sometimes you can take snippets from that to use in a video. I think social proof is obviously is great in an explainer video. It's a great way of kind of backing up the claims that you're making earlier on the video. But from an agency perspective, it's good for us to be able to see it in context, to think of like, this is a client that is actually out there using the product, and this is what they're talking about. So just gives you a better feel from it. And then one of the things that I think I've touched on a couple of times is like, what action steps are you hoping people to take after they watch this video? Outcomes. What is the main purpose of this video? Like I said, is it brand awareness? Is it booking demos? Is it, all the good things that people want to do with video? And 2 weeks from now, what's the one thing that you want people to remember from the video? And one thing is usually enough, to be honest, because you're not asking too much of people to kind of remember multitudes of features and things like that. I think it's always good to have that one thing, that overriding kind of. I mean, sometimes it can be an emotion and things like that. I think all that's good stuff for an agency to use. Or if if you're producing it internally, I think going through a briefing process like that is a good idea. People often jump straight into let's get a script written because we know the product inside out. I think it's still important, even if you're producing it internally, to go through a briefing process and ask yourself those questions, really, because otherwise your script tends to be a bit flabby and a bit all over the place, and you tend to do a lot of editing, which just takes time, and you're piecing things together and stuff like that, which is just frustrating for a copywriter, I imagine.
I think it's really important to go kind of dissect your own thoughts of what the business are like. Erica and I have done like quite a few workshops before with companies just to try and really understand what their perception of the brand is, and it's super interesting because we always like to do it with like the key stakeholders of each department, and you'd just be surprised at the different viewpoint that each person has on the business. So if you're just getting one person, even the marketing people, like where theoretically we should know all of those pain points at a real depth, like there's stuff that people miss, and because there's a pain that they see from their perspective, from compliance side or a technical side or a customer service side. So it's really interesting or not just it's super important to be able to dissect your own understanding of the business and try and get a real picture of it from other stakeholders as well.
That's really
I think,
interesting.
so the other benefit of this brief that you spoke about, doing it internally first, is if you have multiple stakeholders, especially if it's a partnership who's running the business, or if you have your CEO and your VP of sales, et cetera, but just getting everyone to agree on the brief will help you or the copywriter, whoever's the next person in the chain, because there's nothing worse than even just getting one person to do the brief and getting through. But then when you go for sign off, then the other person who wasn't involved goes, what is this? This is not what I wanted. This isn't the direction. So having everyone agree the brief before you touch anybody else, I think is so powerful. And it's a step a lot of people forget. Often marketing teams will just do all that by themselves. And then when the final is done, run that up for approval. And then that's when everyone goes, no, this is not what we wanted. It's been a whole lot of wasted work.
Yeah, to go back and change the video is just so costly. I mean, it's like doing another video again.
Well, exactly. Yeah. You've got to put that's it. And the process has got to involve. And I think it's going back a couple of years actually. We got burnt quite badly. It was the only time we've ever walked away from a client project and just kind of cut our losses essentially. But it was slightly outside our usual kind of client base. Vehicle insurance or something like that. It was something vehicle kind of haulage related. So it was a bit of a strange one, but sometimes you get these, certainly sometimes I get these through LinkedIn. And we'd worked up to the point of done the briefing, all fine, wrote a script and concept, all fine, a few changes, usual kind of things. We storyboarded the entire video out, and then the marketing director ran it up the flagpole at that point to the chairman of the company, who hadn't been involved in any of the process, including the kind of initial briefing process. Had never spoke. I didn't know he existed, to be honest, because we're just dealing with the marketing director, and usually at that point, if you're dealing with a CMO or a marketing director, that's usually where the book stops. Quite often,
Exactly.
I'm dealing with a marketing manager or a VP, and when it's getting run up the flagpole, it's going to the marketing director as a kind of final sign off. And this was, certainly not that. And he left us some feedback on the storyboard that was, quite rude, I'd say, in many respects, largely from the fact that he didn't know why we were producing the video, or the purpose of it, because he hadn't read the brief. He'd just been given, at that stage, we were still doing kind of sketched storyboards. We don't tend to do them anymore. This was one of the reasons that we stopped doing them, actually. But yeah, I always used to find it quite useful to just do scene sketches, just so you could get an overview of what a storyboard. He had no involvement in the process. He didn't understand really. That was what he was seeing, was just, this is just so that we can get an idea of visual representation of the narrative before we start building assets. I think he thought that was what it was going to look like a pencil drawing or something like this. So he'd left some quite rude and condescending comments on it. I had a call with the marketing director, and she was like, "Well, I should have maybe involved him earlier in the process." I thought, yeah,
maybe.
Quite possibly. And I just said, well, he's quite now. He was quite. I don't know whether this is the right company to be working with. And I'm thinking, well, this is a bizarre situation for us to be in. And in the end, I just said, look, I think it's better we just walk away from the project, because I thought I have no real desire to try and now appease somebody who isn't kind of bought in the project in the first place and wasn't bought in. And it's the only time it's ever happened. But I still feel like it was the right decision.
Yeah, you're already on the back foot, and it's going to be an uphill battle, and sometimes you're right. Just kind of throwing in the towel is better than trying to fight against the current, when you could probably just use that time with another client that's a better fit.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Exactly.
just when you're talking about the brief, there was one thing you said about learning about the pain points, and I actually just reminded me of a post that you did the other day, Erica, about I think it was like the first layer, second layer, and third layer of pain points. Like, we often just focus on the first layer, which is like what you were saying, Chris, like it saves you money, or like I need to save money, or I need more leads or something. Not, but there are other pain points that I think make a real difference about what is it how it actually makes them feel. How do they feel in that situation? Like, I'm actually just reading Erica's post here now, but for one example is like, so layer one would be like, I need more leads. But layer two is, I feel overwhelmed and I don't know where to start. And then you get even further, like layer three is like the things you don't want to admit. Like, oh, I'm not sure if this will make me look, will this make me look better, or will it make me look worse, or something like that. Then you get like the real personal pain point. So it's like the business objective, the kind of what they're feeling, and then genuinely like their personal feeling. And if you can understand those three deep layers, then you can create a really powerful piece of content that connects with them on a different level.
Yeah, because that's really digging in. Sorry, Erica, I was just going to say, because that's really digging into the kind of emotional side of it as well, which is actually what connects with people. Because some of that top layer stuff, even though it's important, it's not. It's quite broad as well.
Yeah.
So it's not really digging into how people are actually feeling about a situation that's caused by layer one, I suppose. That's a really good way of looking at it.
And also, sometimes they're making rejection statements about your offer, whatever, but it's not based on layer one, so it doesn't make sense, But and if you haven't done the work, then you're not realizing, so for example, if someone's deeper concern is they don't want to be visible, and then you've gone and created a video which is them full on, full screen, right the way through, talking head for 60 seconds. And then they come back and they give you feedback going, oh no, that's terrible. Like, it doesn't meet the brief. If you didn't understand that they actually didn't want to have their face on for 60 seconds, it's not the content. It's just it's just you've hit that nerve of something they don't want. And we've had that. We took a while to understand that the founder of the business we work with actually wasn't comfortable being front face. And it didn't make sense because we thought he was fabulous, right? But actually it took so much time to get him comfortable. So a lot of the feedback we were getting wasn't because of the quality of our work. It was because we were pushing him into an uncomfortable space. But it took us a while to understand, oh, wait, this is what's happening. And how do we fix that? And once we sorted that out, it was a complete changeover in terms of, okay, now we can move forward. So, Chris, it's been wonderful talking to you. I'm sure we could keep exploring video in much more detail. How can people get hold of you if they want to get some video done or just to talk to you some more?
LinkedIn's always the best place to find me. I'm usually lurking around there most days. So yeah, Chris Walker. It used to be, there was a slightly more famous Chris Walker who was very prominent on LinkedIn up until about 6 months ago, who unfortunately was in a similar industry because he worked with a lot of SaaS companies, but he was a demand gen. He owned a company called Refine Labs over in the US, who were a huge kind of demand gen company. And quite often I get random DMs praising posts and my opinion on things, and I have to unfortunately go back and say, that's not me. That's the other Chris Walker, who's slightly younger, slightly better looking American version of me, who built up a huge LinkedIn following. If you can find his content, actually, he is worth a follow. Unfortunately, he's very big into. He's spent most of the last 3 years pulling the kind of marketing attribution myth to pieces, basically saying that it's complete BS, basically, because it's not as trackable as HubSpot and everybody claim it is.
But back to you. We want to contact
back to
you.
me. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So Chris Walker, I am the most prominent Chris Walker on LinkedIn now, so it's not too difficult to find me. But yeah, LinkedIn's always the best place. Yeah, come and give me a follow. Send me a DM and say hello. I'm very chatty.
Well, I just checked out the other Chris Walker, and he does have a fabulous bed of hair. So
he does. Yeah, he does. He's got a number of. I mean, I'm beginning to think he possibly is AI generated.
Alex has a lot of hair envy at the moment.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Oh yeah, this is why I wearing a hat most days these days. To be honest, once the hair goes, it's quite cold up
there. Yeah.
Alex, what was your biggest takeaway from today?
I think I quite like the conversation we had about kind of dissecting your own thoughts about the business and really going through that brief process and involve your stakeholders, because it can be an expensive lesson, and B, very painful for yourself, and a lot of explanation to be doing and a lot of hat eating. So yeah, that would be my takeaway from today. What about you, Erica?
Yeah, no, I also think this was a good reminder of some of the times we haven't done that, and the lessons we've learned over time. But I also think a good reminder on the length of video is not just picking a number and really thinking through what you're trying to achieve and how do you get that message across correctly. I think that's really a good reminder.
Yeah, I love it.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you.
No worries at all. Thank you very much.
I'll see you again, Alex.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That wraps up this episode of Giraffes Don't Eat Steak. Thanks for joining us. I hope you found value in our discussion and got some new ideas to apply to your own business. Tune in next week for another round of marketing insights and inspiration. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We appreciate you listening. Catch you next time on Giraffes Don't Eat Steak.